5 years ago, the number of people found mentally incompetent to stand trial and waiting in Texas jails for restoration treatment at a state hospital hit a new record, more than 1,800. A state advisory committee admitted specific data on individuals waiting could help reduce that backlog. But KXAN discovered many critical details were not tracked, including when people died waiting. So how has that problem changed today? On a special From the Vault edition of our weekly Inside the Investigation program, we discuss updates to our team's Mental Competency Consequences project and where the investigation could go next. Hello and welcome to another From the Vault edition of Inside the Investigation. I'm KXAN Investigative Director Josh Hinkle, here with my investigative colleague, Senior Investigative Producer David Barrere. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So today we are going all the way back to, we've done this over several years, over the last maybe 6 years, talking about mental competency. And particularly today, we're going to be talking about a project called Mental Competency Consequences. So just to get people caught up, how did we even start talking about mental competency in the first place at KXAN?
Yeah, so this goes back to before the pandemic. We worked, I'll say the state legislature and lawmakers were very interested in trying to improve the state's mental health systems. They were dedicating billions of dollars to the state hospital system, and it was really top of mind. And so we were looking into that, and we got into reporting on a big project that we called Locked in Limbo, which was looking at the state's problem with a wait list for people to get into a state hospital. And that essentially is a list of people who, for the most part, were stuck in jail. They were declared incompetent to stand trial, and they were ordered to be sent to a state hospital to get competency restoration, and they weren't able to get there because, or at least quickly, because there was a wait. And so they were placed on what they call the wait list. So we had reported on that. It was a big project. And as we kept looking into it, we saw that, we kept digging and digging, finding new things. And one thing that we saw was that they were not tracking important data and statistics about the people that were on the wait list. And the experts that we spoke with agreed that there were some things that were, pretty striking, like the number of people who had died while waiting. If people were housed at the time that they were arrested and put in jail, things that are really pretty important to understand. What are the drivers of people going into the state hospital system and onto the wait list? And if they weren't tracking those, one expert we talked to, her name was Linda Frost, said, we want the state wants to lower the wait list, and they can't do that if they don't understand what's driving it. And so that was really one of the big things that we were looking at in this project.
So as we kept working on the project, one of the things that we looked at was how do we go further with it? A group called the USC Center for Health Journalism got wind of our project with Locked in Limbo and encouraged us to apply for a national fellowship, where we got some grant funding and also access to other resources and experts who could help us kind of understand the data a little bit more and work on the storytelling to really explore that death aspect. How many people were dying in jail while they were waiting on this wait list to get into a state hospital to have a bed so they could get that mental competency restoration and be able to be competent enough to stand trial. So through that fellowship, we created Mental Competency Consequences, and that was a big project for us. But my favorite part of this was the storytelling aspect, because I think with a lot of, jail-based stories, many people might not identify with it because they haven't been in jail before. But when you realize that what's happening in the mental competency system is happening to everyday people that are stuck in that system, and sometimes it's through no fault of their own. They are mentally ill and they just need help so they can get through the court process. And this involves families and friends and likely people that you may know. Through that, some of the cases that we profiled, Naquan Carter and Fernando Macias.
Yeah.
What's going on with those cases?
So those are two tragic cases. Naquan Carter was a young black man who was 23 years old. He had grown up in the foster care system, and he was in Travis County Jail awaiting transfer to a state-supported living center. And those are locations that help medically fragile people with mental health problems. That's a big part of what they do. And so he was scheduled to go there, but there was a wait. In Travis County Jail, his health deteriorated, and he was found in his cell dead after being, I believe, on the ground for a couple hours. The Travis County Sheriff's Office gave us a statement and said he was, actually kind of beloved by the jailers there and the people that worked in the jail. She called him a gentle giant. And we interviewed a woman who cared for him for a long time when he was younger. And it just really broke her heart how things had ended up for Naquan. And it's really emblematic of the problem, because if he had been able to get into a state-supported living center, he probably would have been able to get much better care that was geared towards him, that the Travis County Jail, and really, if you look at all the jails, they're not equipped to give that kind of care to people with mental health problems. So we profiled that case, and then also Fernando Macias, who was, in his youth, we spoke with his brother named Walter, who explained the whole situation and gave us all the court records associated with the case. But Fernando, growing up, was a normal young man, very smart, and then he developed some mental health problems that got worse and worse with age. When he got into his late 50s, early 60s, he really deteriorated. He had schizophrenia and some bipolar disorder and depression, and he ended up getting into a shootout, barricading himself into his own home, and there was a shootout with DPS at his mother's home, and his mother was killed in that whole incident. He ended up going to Bexar County Jail. That's where San Antonio is, and his health deteriorated severely. He lost a lot of weight. He was refusing to eat food. He was refusing to take his medication. He was refusing medical help. And that's all something that his brother, Walter, told us he wasn't making rational decisions. He wasn't capable of making those types of decisions for himself because he was completely mentally incompetent. And he died in jail, sadly, of medical complications from just his deteriorating health and some chronic health conditions that he had. So we profiled his case as well, and we profiled others. And those are just two of many. We later found dozens of people have died while on this wait list, trying to get into a state hospital. And that was just two of the cases, but to try to bring home to people how these are, people that you could know. These are situations that could happen to anyone that could develop a mental illness and get stuck in the system.
And while those stories are unfortunate, they allow us to highlight the dangers of this long wait list. And we bring those stories here to the Capitol and share those with lawmakers. And we've seen legislation that has been sparked because of our reporting and because of other similar reporting. One of the bills that we were tracking was from Representative Gina Hinojosa, a Democrat here in Austin, who's now running for governor of the state of Texas. And what this bill would have done was speed up the wait time and require, after a judge gives an order to give someone a mental competency restoration, that has to happen within 3 weeks. They have to be transferred to a treatment program or a state hospital to do that. Unfortunately, that bill did not go anywhere in the 2023 legislative session. Let's flash forward to 2025, and there was a legislatively mandated audit that was created that really looked at a lot of the data around this, including how many deaths. You mentioned there were dozens. I believe there were like 50 between 2020 and 2025 that they were able to identify statewide where people had died on this wait list. 50 people had died during that 5-year period at least. So that was really interesting, and we reported on that, and that helped re-inspire piece of legislation that Senator Sarah Eckhart, also a Democrat here in Austin, filed for the second session in a row, I believe, to really create a broader statewide study of the state's mental competency system, along with some other mental health avenues that would have been in that. And it would have been perhaps the most comprehensive study that had ever been done in the state of Texas to look at things like, why is this backlog still happening? Why are people waiting as long as they are? How do we get more beds, state hospital beds in the state of Texas? What other restoration alternatives are out there? That bill also ended up stalling because that's how things go in the legislative session sometimes. Everything doesn't make it through, especially at the end of the session when there's a lot of time deadlines and some pieces of legislation just get stuck. And that's what happened there. She did vow to bring that back up in the subsequent session, which is next year. But what we've seen from Sarah Eckhart since then is she is now running for state controller. So someone else will have to pick up that mantle and move it forward if that study is going to come up in the next legislative session. Out of all of this, though, we've still been tracking the state hospital wait list, and it really comes down to what the Health and Human Services Commission and its committee that looks at the wait list are doing. And we've kind of seen some ups and downs with that over the year, but most recently there was some fairly good news, right?
Yeah, so things are trending in the right direction, you could say. Just to give you like 3 points on a timeline. When we did our reporting in 2021, when I was discussing those the Mental Competency Consequences report, the wait list was around 1,800 people. 3 years later, in the winter of 2022, the wait list peaked at over 2,500 people. Last month, it had a little over 1,600 people. So it's gone down, it's moving in a better direction, but 1,600 people is a lot to have on a wait list. People are still waiting months and months to get in many cases. A big problem was, going back to the pandemic, a lot of state hospital beds had to be taken offline because of staffing shortages. The staffing shortage issue has been much improved, and a lot of the beds that were taken offline are back. So that's positive, but they still have this big wait list that they're struggling to get through.
All right. David Barrera, thank you very much for being here and for reporting with me on this important issue, which we will continue tracking. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
All right. You can watch all new episodes of Inside the Investigation on the KXAN Plus Smart TV app every Friday. You can also listen to an audio version on KXAN's Investigative podcast with new episodes every Saturday morning wherever you get podcasts.